Lovely. So welcome everyone. We're really excited to be here. I'm Jackie Harland and this is Helen.
Hello everyone.
And we're the founders of Arc Pathway. And we have got Orla Morrison here with us today, which we're really thrilled about. Thank you, Orla, for joining us. Orla is a very experienced occupational therapist. And we have asked her to come here so we can talk about sensory processing, which is a fascinating subject, isn't it?
It's so amazing. I'm so pleased to have you, Orla.
It's really good. So thank you, Orla. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask Orla some different questions. And really what we want to get out of this session, if you're an early years teacher or if you're a parent, what we want to get out of this session is really that we can understand a bit more about sensory processing and how our sensory responses can impact our daily living. We want to really recognize the roots of some sensory behavior. So when we see a child doing something, that we have a better idea, oh, that could be a sensory response. And I always think, because I talked to you about my son was a biter. And used to bite children until I got crunchy food, because an occupational therapist told me get some crunchy food, and he stopped biting children and he bit carrots, which was much better.
Great.
We also would love to quiz Orla on some ideas of different activities to do to help children. So
that's so good. And we'll obviously, if you have a question, if you're watching, you have a question, just pop it in the Q&A, and Orla can ask those. We might do it as we go along if it seems relevant to what she's talking about, or we'll keep them to the end. So Orla,
yes,
the sensory processing. So I've read it's 5 senses and it's 8 senses. Which one is it? It's confusing.
Yes, so there is the common misconception that it is just those 5 kind of standard senses that everyone is aware of. So the sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. But there is also these 3 kind of more hidden additional senses that play a huge part in us being able to process and regulate in our own sensory environment, which are proprioception, the vestibular system, and there's one that's a bit more new. It's kind of come up in the last 5-6 years. It's become more prevalent in teachings and understanding the way that people process their daily life, and it's interoception, which is that internal sense. So that's playing a big part at the moment in understanding people's sensory needs, and it's a very interesting one as well. So yeah, we've got 8 senses rather than the 5 we thought we had.
So that last one, when you talk about interoception, I haven't said that correctly.
Interoception.
Interoception.
Is that
interoception?
Right? Yeah. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
With that, is that things like understanding that I feel sad, or understanding I feel hungry? What sort of thing?
Tired?
Would it be
things like that?
Yeah, so it's basically that in a nutshell. It's you being able to understand how your body is feeling internally when you're like nervous or worried about something. When you're hungry, you need to go to the bathroom, understanding temperature, understanding arousal, all of these different feelings that you have inside that you can maybe mix up if you have any difficulties with that type of processing. It's, I suppose, gives a more scientific definition to hangry. So if you're feeling hungry and angry, it's mixing those things up. It's very much a thing. So those emotions can get mixed up with different things like hunger, or if you're needing to go to the bathroom, or if you're feeling tired. Being able to separate emotions and those kind of physiological feelings as well can often get mixed up in the internal senses. So that's kind of what interoception is that it's your awareness of what's hunger and what's angry, and being able to separate those and process it.
It's so interesting.
And does it get easier as you get older? I mean, like children, so a little child can hear from birth, and their vision develops very, very quickly. But with something like interoception, is it something that gets easier as children get older? Because some children, when they're younger, don't seem to be able to. We talk about emotions and learning emotional vocabulary, but they seem to find it difficult to recognize that. Is it something that's refined as you get older?
Yeah. Definitely. And I think it comes along with life experience, and you can associate that feeling with certain situations, and you know that you enjoyed doing that thing and you want to do it again. Maybe that made you happy, and you know how that made you feel internally as well. And being able to relate that to future situations helps you to understand, oh, this is happiness and this is what makes me feel happy. So it definitely does come with that emotional maturity as you grow older and you just experience life. But it can be more difficult, or there might be like that dampened part in your interoception system where you find it harder to separate those things or understand them or relate them to certain situations. So there's quite a big kind of emotional regulation / social crossover when it comes to the interoception system, which is really interesting. And just building up awareness of how your body feels in certain situations can really help with that processing and understanding. So it is quite fascinating to work through those types of things.
I think that's so interesting, because I think children, I had a son that used to get very hangry after school.
Yes.
I think we all, probably a lot of us have that.
I have a husband who gets
Does
hungry.
he?
Yes.
Does he get hangry as well? But it was, I'd say, are you hungry? And he's, no, I'm not hungry. No, I'm not hungry. And just obviously he was. Yeah. He just couldn't actually see the anger was overplaying the hunger.
Yeah,
so it's really good, isn't it? I suppose just to talk and flag up for children and just sort of model saying, I feel tired and I feel hungry 100%. And I feel thirsty and all these things, and just sort of get them used to thinking about whether they feel like that too.
And I suppose those zones of regulation helps as well, which is the color-coded system, isn't it?
Yes, definitely. Like that is a fantastic program, especially for sensory and emotional understanding, and being able to say in this moment, oh, actually, I'm feeling in the yellow zone because I'm a bit worried about this. It's really helpful to have that visual to support with that internal understanding, especially if you have any difficulties with processing. Just giving that reinforcement in a visual way can be really, really helpful, and that consistent language as well to build on that understanding.
That's so good. So good. So Orla, can we look at things like being under responsive and being over responsive? And if we start first of all with being under responsive, what does so when I think about sensory processing, I think of sensory seeking and sensory avoiding. If we take the under responsive child and think about things like auditory, oral, tactile, what does that sort of child look like? And are they the seeker?
Yes. So under responsive, in a nutshell, is where a lot feels like very little. So that is the people who will seek out more because they're not really getting much input from what we would feel like is quite a lot of input that they're getting, but they're not getting it as intensely as we might feel things. So this might be the kid that's bumping into people really hard. They have no awareness that they've done it. They've like, someone might hit off them when they pass and they have zero reaction to it. They just are not processing that that's just happened, because to them it doesn't really feel like much. So it's when a lot of that input, be it a hit or a loud noise or bright lights, where they just don't seem like much of anything, because they would need a lot more themselves to be able to become even slightly overwhelmed by that kind of input. So they tend to seek it out more, and they will like the kids that move around a lot, they'll be up and moving around the classroom quite often, because to them they don't feel like maybe doing a quick little jump around the classroom doesn't feel like a lot of input, but they might walk around the classroom for about 10-15 minutes and then come back and sit down, because then they've achieved that input that we would have received just from jumping up and down and doing 10 star jumps. So that's kind of in a nutshell, or well, a bit longer than a nutshell, what under responsiveness
great. I mean, do they need it? Is it important to be able to have that child that needs to be walking around the classroom? Is it important that they do?
Yeah, 100%. It's almost like, when you've got an itch that you need to scratch and you don't scratch that itch, it's constantly there in the background and you're going to be thinking about that itch the whole time. So it's similar for kids that would like seek out that movement. If they don't get that movement that they're seeking, it can almost overstimulate them in other ways and cause quite a lot of frustration. And I suppose that's when it pops into the interoception system and it starts to get a little bit irritated and angry, like you're going to get frustrated with things because you've got that other feeling of needing to do something and you're not sure how to express that or get that. So yeah, it's like an itch that you can't scratch, and it's important to get that input to be able to focus on what you need to focus on.
So we shouldn't be saying sit down. So say in a nursery classroom, we shouldn't be saying sit down. We should be taking them for a good walk and then helping them to sit down.
100%, because sensory behaviors are a form of communication. Everything we do in life is a form of communication, I think, really. And if you really do observe someone who might be jumping up and moving around the classroom, yes, they're doing that, but then when they come back to the desk, are they able to engage a bit more once they've had that movement? Do kids, after they've had a run around the playground at break time, do you feel like they come back into the classroom and they're able to engage a little bit more at the tabletop? Those kind of things.
That's great. And thinking about oral, so a lot of children put things in their mouths and are wanting to chew. And as I said, I had my son was a biter. And I see a lot of children that were putting things in their mouth, and that's oral seeking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that kind of links.
We can do to help them with that.
Yeah, so for the kids that are oral seeking, it might be like they like the feel of things and the textures, but it also might be that if they're biting, they're seeking that proprioceptive input through their jaw. And by getting things like crunchy snacks or chewy, or even using a water bottle like this, where you have to suck on something where you're going to have to purse your lips and use the muscles in your face to get the water out of the bottle. Those kind of things can be really helpful to give that stimulation to that system that the child is seeking out. And it can be quite a regulating and calming thing as well. Quite soothing. It's like when you were younger and you used to have a bottle or used to have a dummy. Those types of things are forms of proprioception, oral proprioception that you're getting, and you're getting that input through your jaw and your muscles in your mouth. And that's going to give that same kind of calming and soothing feeling.
That's so good.
Does it, as they get older, does it reduce? So, I mean, my son doesn't bite anyone and he's 30, so that's good news, isn't it? But, does it sort of read that sense, or do they go on to be the people who are chewing gum or doing, does it reduce or does it stay similar?
I think it's very different from person to person, because as you get older, things might change. Like, things do change. You might not be as much of a seeker as you were when it comes to like chewing on things, because it's kind of your sensory system has evolved a little bit to a different, to where you actually don't really require that anymore, because your sensory system and your sensory preferences, they change throughout your life. And when you do get older, you might find that there are like teenagers or adults who will chew on their pen, who will be constantly chewing gum or chewing on mints, or really like those hard sugary sweets to chew on as well. Like, that's a form of like oral proprioceptive input that they're seeking and getting. And it's something that they might just automatically do now because they know that they enjoy doing that, but actually it's quite a soothing and calming thing for them that they didn't realize was a sensory strategy that they're using. So you kind of get into your routines and habits as you get older and you become more independent, and you can just get things by yourself, and you are regulating yourself. You're regulating yourself without even realizing you're regulating yourself. And I suppose that's just that awareness of self.
Yes, exactly.
Might be good to do that question now. Yes. We've got a question, Orla. Can we?
Yes, let's go for it. This is from Chloe Ross. How do you determine which areas a child are over or understimulated in? Is there a way to do this in a setting, or is it something an OT or other specialist would need to do? That's a great question. Thank you, Chloe.
That's a very good question. It's always good to get an opinion, I think, of a professional when it comes to things like this, depending on the setting, but you can also track behaviors. So like just taking note of what's the behavior, when did it happen, those ABC charts that you can use in schools. So it just writing things down and keeping record of when these happen and what do they look like, what are they seeking, what are they not seeking? What are they trying to get away from? That tells you a lot about the type of system that is understimulated or overstimulated. And from there, you're able to kind of curate some strategies that can support that child with being more functionally independent in the classroom and being able to process and regulate in the classroom or home environment. So tracking those behaviors and seeing what system it's impacting is a nice way to get an idea of it for yourself.
Great.
That's really
and
good.
I think, yeah, I mean, maybe if we talk, when we talk about the over-responsive child, will also help, Chloe. So if we're thinking about the under-responsive, that's the child that is moving a lot, putting things in their mouth a lot, bumping into other children and not realizing, liking that loud noises, that sort of response. But then what about the over-responsive child? I'm asking you.
Oh, that's fine.
I'm
That's
so sorry.
I'm really interested in
We've
this
written
one.
down who's going to ask what question. I just asked Helen's question.
No, I'm really interested in this one. So over-responsive children, you know, what does that look like? And,
Yes.
and how can we help them? Because that's, yeah. Tell us about that.
I will. There's so kind of going back to under-responsive, and in a nutshell, it was a lot feels like a little. Over-responsive is when a little feels like an awful lot. So I mentioned the example about someone hitting past someone who's under-responsive and they barely notice. And then you have the over-responsive person who someone brushes past them, and it might literally just be that, but their reaction is quite big. So this could be someone hitting back because they feel like they've been hard done by somebody. It's almost painful to them because their tactile system is so on edge that just a little bit of a brush is setting off that fight or flight response in their head. And that might be for them to run away, shout, hit back. That's kind of what over-responsiveness looks like for like a tactile kid. It might be for the auditory sensitive kids who really struggle with noise. Hands are going over the ears because certain noises are just too much for them and they need to dampen it out by covering their ears. More often than not, with the auditory sensitivity, the kids that are covering their ears or the kids that are making the most noise will be the ones that are actually the most sensitive to the noise because they're trying to control the sound. So you might have like someone who's screaming in the corner while other noises are happening in the background, and you're kind of like, oh, they really are seeking out a lot of this noise. They must be quite under-responsive, when actually what they're doing is controlling the noise because they're so sensitive to the other noises in the room, and it's stopping the unfavorable noise from getting in by them making their own noise.
Okay.
Yes, because some children I've heard will sing or hum or find it very difficult to stay quiet. And do you think that might be related to that?
Yeah, it's usually a good indication that that child needs a break from the environment that they're in, because it might be quite auditory overstimulating for them. So if you see the kids in the classroom making the most amount of noise, or you're at home and there's the extractor fan is on while you're cooking and then your child is making a lot of noise, it could be that they're just a bit overstimulated by everything that they can't control in the room noise wise, and they're creating their own sound and their own noise to help them to regulate. It's almost an automatic response for them because they know that's going to get rid of that outside noise.
That's interesting. So if you've got a really noisy child, then just be aware that it could be a number of different reasons. It could be that they actually don't like noise, and that's how that's very interesting.
Wow.
Can you get mixed, Orla? So you've got someone who's got a pattern where they're oversensitive to maybe auditory, but undersensitive to something else.
100%. Everyone's sensory preferences and sensory processing abilities are completely different. You might have kids who they really struggle with processing auditory instructions. So you give them auditory instruction, they get quite overwhelmed. They might not be able to process what you're saying. So giving them a visual thing, because visually they're quite strong in that they can process the visual things quite well. So giving them like a visual card like PECS or visual schedule can help them to process an instruction. It can help them to process what's coming up next without getting too overstimulated, because that auditory input can be quite a lot for them to take. you can have kids who are they're very much like movement seeking, but they've got very good body awareness. Like not every system is going to be under responsive because one system is under responsive. You can have such a mixture of sensory needs.
Wow.
And it could be that one system processes typically and the rest not so much. So it's just like everyone is so unique, and that is, I think, what makes it quite tricky when working with sensory needs, because you do have to unpick each system and trial so many different things and so many different strategies to see what works best for that person, because there's no clear-cut strategy, but there are a bunch of strategies that you can try and see what the preference of that person is.
Interesting.
It's knowing them, isn't it? It's getting to know all those different sort of idiosyncrasies that we have, and observing really, really carefully. Yeah.
And that's where tracking behaviors, keeping a diary or a chart of when these happen and what the responses are, can be so helpful to understand a person as well.
Yes. No, that's good. There was a little boy, wasn't there?
Yes. So there was someone we know who said to us about this little boy, never let him run, because if you let him run, he'll never calm down. And I thought, oh gosh, I bet that is a sensory thing.
Yeah.
So can you talk to us a little bit about calming? Because I think there's probably a lot of practitioners listening who have noted that after, children have run around, they find it very hard to calm down, and sort of maybe they've been running in the playground and then they need to come into a circle time and they can't manage that. What do we do to help those sort of children?
And particularly this little boy, Tom, not his real name, who
never let Tom run.
Never let him run. Obviously you would let him run, wouldn't you?
Yes.
So
how can they manage that?
Yeah.
We want
so that's kind of looking at those. He could be, it could be that he's over responsive, but he likes the feeling of that over responsiveness, so he runs a lot because he enjoys being overstimulated, which is kind of a tricky one to work with, but it can be helped. And then you've got he could be under responsive, so he's doing a lot of running, and that has kind of escalated him to a point of where he might be quite dysregulated. So what can be helpful is if you do an alerting activity like running, jumping, spinning, swinging, and then you need to go to a learning environment afterwards, follow that up with some calming or organizing activities. So that's going to be like your heavy work activities where you're going to be engaging the muscles and joints. So you've got things like pushing, pulling, lifting, holding heavier objects. They can all give this nice calming proprioceptive input, anything that's going to engage the muscles and the joints. If you think about lifting weights at the gym, or even climbing the stairs engages muscles that will, and your joints, and it's going to actually wear out your body a little bit and it calms it down a bit. So let's take Tom, for example. He's running around the playground and he's going to, the bell goes, it's time to transition back into the classroom for circle time. Then he might have the opportunity to maybe transition in a different way. So get him to crawl back into the classroom, or get him to do bear walks into the classroom, or get him to do frog jumps where he has to go all the way down to the ground and all the way back up, because it's basically like doing a squat, which that definitely tires me out. Or take the stairs back to the classroom, take the long way back, or get him to push the wall or hold the door open for his peers. All these different things that can be done to help engage those muscles and joints to help calm that system down before going back into a learning environment.
That's good. I think that's really good.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah. We've had an interesting question come up. And it's a question about, I'm sure you've seen a lot of children when they become quite overstimulated, overstimulated is the wrong word, but they can alert when they're very alerted, or excited, they can flap their hands.
Yes.
And the question is there an age where hand flapping becomes a concern if there are no other concerns around the child?
See, hand flapping is a funny one, because I think as you get older, you might be able to control it a bit more because you're more socially aware.
Yeah.
And you find other ways to communicate your excitement, like, oh my goodness, I'm so excited. You can verbalize it.
You flap your hands then.
Did I?
I'm so excited.
Yeah, so but that would be
we?
considered acceptable.
Yeah.
But I personally find like hand flapping to be like a lovely little bit of self-regulation. It's not harming anyone. It's not preventing anyone from being able to carry out their daily routine. It's just a nice way, getting excited. Oh my God, I'm excited.
Yeah.
So you can replace it with like maybe just acknowledging it verbally, like, oh, you look like you're excited. Are you excited? So that maybe in the future they might be able to verbalize what they're saying, but that's not always going to be the case for everyone. So I think that kind of self-stimulation, or stimming it's called, that kind of shaking when excited, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a bad thing. I feel like it's a nice little self-regulation tool that some people do, some kids do, some adults do. And yeah, it's a nice little proprioceptive thing, because if you think about it, you're getting that muscle and joint input when you do that, or when you tense your fingers when you're excited, you're self-regulating. And
I agree with you. And I think that's a good thing in the question, in that it's, it was, there are no other concerns with the child. So if there's no other concerns, then that is just what the child's doing to self-regulate. I like the idea of saying, verbalizing, oh, you're excited, so that they can then, I'm excited. Might be a way. That's great.
Labeling what they're feeling or what they're doing it's really powerful, isn't it?
100%.
How can we tell if a response is sensory or behavior?
Yes, so this is actually something that comes up often. There is often that confusion between sensory processing needs and behavior. And there's kind of this little, is it an anagram of sorts? So sense, and you say stop and assess the situation. Don't assume that it's a behavior. Just it's again tracking to see what's going on. I talk a lot about tracking, but you can just learn so much by observing what's happening and taking note of responses to different things. So stop and assess the situation. Don't assume it's a behavior. Notice, has there been an environment change? Has there been a new demand placed on the child? Have you tried sensory strategies and tools, and are they just not effective? A lot of the times, if you're seeing a sensory behavior, it's a kind of that physical response, or they're looking for something, and once they get it, you can see them start to regulate again. But with behavior, you're looking at things like, did this happen just as they started a new piece of work? Are they struggling with this work, so they're going to avoid it by throwing the work onto the ground, or biting their pen, or running out of the room? When they do it, are they looking back to see if you're watching? Because you're not going to get that when there's a sensory behavior. It's kind of like this just physical response that just happens because you can't really control it as much as you would like to be able to. But with like attention seeking behaviors, for example, would it be that they're waiting till someone's watching and then all of a sudden push their book onto the ground? So it's just taking note of the situation that's happening at the time. Have you tried sensory strategies and tools? Are they not responding to them like they usually would? Then what are they doing now? Is this something that they might be struggling with because they don't understand the topic, so they're avoiding it because it's too hard? Or is this a topic they don't like, so they're just like, no, I'm not going to engage in this, so I'm going to act out, and then they won't make me do it. So it's again going back to that kind of tracking side of things, but also trying out your sensory tools and seeing if that helps, and if not, then what else could it be?
That's great.
Exactly.
We've had a few questions, or there's got a particular question here on eating, which is often related to sensory issues. And if I read the question, I think this would be good. How can we help children who are regarded as picky eaters and who would only eat crunchy foods like crisps and will not eat healthy food or a balanced diet? How can we help them explore other textures? And are they under seekers or over seekers?
Oh, well, the under seekers are over, like the under responsive or over responsive. It's very much dependent. It could be, are they just grossed out by the texture completely, and just touching it makes them really stressed out because they're getting mess on their hands, or it's sticky on their hands, and they just can't cope with that kind of tactile input. And if they're, it tends more often than not to be that they're over responsive to things, and they're a bit more sensitive to that input. So it might be a texture thing. It might be an actual oral proprioceptive sensitivity. So crunchy foods might actually be a bit more painful for them to chew on than softer foods. So there's like a number of factors that it could be. So it could be down to texture, it could be down to taste, it could be the smell, it could be that it's just uncomfortable for them to chew on, or it could be an oral motor difficulty and they've reduced awareness inside their mouth, so they're not able to move the food from one side to the other, so they might gag on the food, and that's kind of deterred them from wanting to try that food again, because they're like, oh, that was scary, I don't want to do that again. So there's a number of factors that comes into play when it's food and sensory, and I feel like feeding is a very complex topic. But there are some really nice things that you can do just to, I suppose, create that exposure to new foods and start exploring these new foods by using things like play, or even when take the pressure off like meal times and just say, oh, can you help me chop up this food for dad, and like, or help me chop up this food for your sister. Like these types of things that you can do to expose them to food, but remove the pressure of them having to do it, to having to eat it or having to touch everything. Like you can do that if you want to, but you don't have to, that's okay. Just having different foods for them to explore in their environment can be really helpful with exposure, and it might increase their curiosity, and they might be like, actually, I'm just going to go up and have a little bit of a touch of that one day, or I'm going to go up and sniff it. All those things, like it's a very gradual thing when it comes to food exploration, but exposure is going to be a super important part to it. But exposure without the stress and the pressure of having to eat it.
That's really good. So playing really with it, cutting it, smelling it, trying it from someone else's plate, all sorts of things.
And we had this someone said this lovely idea of just putting a whole load of things on the table, and having the children there, you don't eat anything, you're just looking at it, cutting it, slicing it, picking it up, smelling it, don't have to eat any of it,
making patterns with it.
Exactly, as you say, exposure without the stress. That's amazing.
And there's additional things you can do, like if they are more tactile sensitive and textures really do upset them and they struggle with that, give them other options. You can cut this up or touch this with gloves, so you don't get the stickiness.
Interesting.
So it's like, or you can use a spoon, like using utensils rather than using your hands can be another way to create that barrier to prevent that overstimulation with tactile input.
Yeah, that's really good.
It's got a huge impact on so many different areas. So that's feeding, but also toileting.
Yes,
it has a massive impact on children as well. There are so many different areas, and I suppose we just need to be really aware. Is this a sensory response or is this a behavior?
I think you're so right with toileting, because I remember at my primary school, the toilets were horrible, and I was put off going into them. Because they smelt horrible, they echoed. I probably had some kind of sensory processing going on there. And to this day, I like to have comfort, warmth.
I can't go in a public toilet unless I'm absolutely desperate.
I know, exactly.
So maybe that's sensory.
Maybe we are digressing a bit, but it's so important, isn't it? To have the environment right and to understand.
100%.
And like you say, that exposure without the stress for any of this, it's sort of that applies right across the board, doesn't it?
And a lot of things as well, like a behavioral response could be that they want to be in control of something. So giving them control by giving them choices is a way to help with that sensory exposure, because there are going to be some behaviors that coincide with sensory behaviors, and control is often one of them, and wanting to have control of the situation where you might feel like you have less control because the anxiety that sensory sensitivities bring. So it's nice to just have the pressure taken off you to explore Carefree environment.
Absolutely.
That's so good.
So Orla, we're coming to the end, but we've got a question here about if there's anyone listening from a nursery or preschool, are there any, like we talk about sensory diets, are there any whole group sensory activities that we can do to support children in a nursery, or is it so individualistic or individualized that you can't do a whole group sensory activity?
So I definitely think you can do a whole group sensory activity for sure. There might be 2-3 kids where that doesn't suit them, and you might need to do a little bit more individual stuff with them. But I think it's a great thing to normalize getting up and moving to help to sustain attention or to help with engagement, making it the norm that once we start to get a little bit sleepy, that we're going to get up and move around, and creating that awareness from a young age that we can do things to help us to listen and engage a bit more.
Yeah.
So there's lovely things like sensory circuits are fantastic for kind of that whole group break, or so that's like starting off with something alerting like jumping up and down, and then finishing with a big squeeze to help us to get back to our, like, to be able to concentrate, or following those lovely Just Dance videos on YouTube. It's a nice easy way to get onto it. Or there's these like I've seen them in a lot of schools and I never know the name of them, but it's like the Wiggles or something that there's some wiggle videos. They have lovely stuff, lovely resources on YouTube where they basically guide you through a movement break that you can just throw on, and the second it's on a screen, the kids are hooked, they're going to do it. So it's a nice way to kind of use those strategies to help with engagement on a whole class level throughout the day. And it's so nice because it normalizes it for the kids that need it the most, who would otherwise be kind of singled out. And I think it's a lovely thing to normalize getting the sensory input that you need, because it just helps to prevent difficulties as you get older as well, I think, by having that awareness and that normality around getting what you need to regulate and to attend.
And one more question, that's really brilliant. One more question is, are there any like must-haves, things that you would say? I'm thinking like a move and sit cushion, or a therapy. Is it therapy? The hiding things in therapy and things. Is there anything that you would say it would be really good for an early years setting to have these resources?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's definitely things that I will time and time again be recommending to schools and nurseries, and it's move and sit cushions and wedge cushions are definitely the big one. It just gives that movement and that wiggliness, and it allows the kids to wiggle and sit in a tent for a little bit longer. We've got potty, the different strengths of potty, just pulling that apart and playing with potty. You're getting that proprioceptive input through the hands and the muscles and the joints, which can be quite regulating and calming. Ear defenders are always great ones to have in the background, ready to go for those auditory sensitivity kids. Maybe a couple of weighted blankets for when you're doing story time and you might feel like there's a bit of, you might see them getting a little bit agitated. Give them a sensory break and then come back and have the weighted blanket on their lap, so that when they're reading the book, they're still getting a bit of kind of calming input, because they're fine. Maybe it might be later in the day and they're getting tired, so they're going to be a bit more sensitive. So
interesting.
Yeah, there's lovely little bits to have, like, I think as well, a little quiet tent that blocks things out in the corner of the classroom, where someone can go if everything is just getting too much. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of movement. I'm going to go into my little tent in the corner. I'm just going to sit there for 5 minutes, recoup, and then I can come back out and engage in some activities. So that's all. I think a little tent corner is a great one to have, like a little fort of safety in the corner of the classroom.
We like those, don't we?
That's so good. We do. We do. We've got a question, Chloe. Brilliant. In Chloe's previous setting, nursery and reception, they had heavy activities such as pushing a washing basket along the floor. If a child needs it individually, could you ask them to carry a large box to help you, so they aren't singled out but can still receive the input they need?
100%. That is a fantastic thing to do. So even if it's, oh, can you help me stack the chairs? Can you hold the door open for everyone? Can you help me hand out these books? Can you help me bring this tray over here? Those are brilliant ways to get heavy work activities without singling out someone. Yeah, for sure. That's great. Wonderful things. And it could be that like helping to bring out the bins or just sweeping the floor, all these little things, wiping down the tables. These can all give that calming proprioceptive input, but it allows you to give them little bits of it throughout the day in a lovely kind of informal and inclusive way.
I think that's
Brilliant.
so important. I think that's one of the, having functional movement breaks and functional activities, that you're not saying this is part of the child's therapy, you're actually embedding it and making it part of their daily skills, so they don't stand out in any way, and being really inclusive on that. That's great. Orla, that's amazing.
Thank you, Orla.
We love that.
No problem. I hope you found it informative and helpful.
Yes, really, really helpful. Thank you so much. And I love those. I love the things you can actually have in your setting.
Yeah,
I think I might get some of these in my home. I quite fancy that blanket.
Yeah, I
really
want
nice.
the weighted blanket.
The weighted
definitely.
blanket. That'd be so lovely.
Is there, Orla, can I just, we do need to finish, but is there, so I'm just thinking whether there are little, like, could a teacher fill in a form or a sort of a little simple questionnaire on a child to see whether they're seeking or avoiding, or do they need to come to an OT for that? Is there something?
Usually because the sensory profiles are all done online now, but technically the school could purchase kind of a subscription to Pearson Clinical and carry out those sensory profile assessments online themselves. However, just so that the information is being communicated properly and kind of read through properly, it would be good to seek out the support of an occupational therapist to be able to really make sense of what's being said on that assessment.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Thank
you, Orla. Fantastic. We really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.
This was lovely. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. See you soon.
See you soon. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope you found it helpful. And we're going to finish now, but see you soon.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.